Bienvenidos a todas las personas que están escuchando a 51 de Faith and Whatever. Welcome, everybody, to the 51st episode of the Faith and Whatever podcast, the podcast that is constantly teetering on the border of excellence and mediocrity. We are joined today in the sunny beaches of New Mexico by the one and only Brian Sands. Does New Mexico have beaches? It does now.
Sure.
Don't care, Garrett.
I'm sure after a nuclear testing site somewhere, there's a beach.
That could be true. So, all right. If you guys remember Brian Sands from that was probably our 7th episode or 10th episode, somewhere thereabouts. We had him on because Brian is a spectacular author who's getting ready to publish a book. So in the meantime, he got bored of waiting for people to catch up to his book. So he decided to start writing articles. And so, Brian, you have an article out with Relevant Magazine right now called Everyone Loves Sex, So Why Wait?, which is a pretty good precursor title to your book. And so the subtext is what God and science have to say about sex and marriage. So we're going to kind of dive into this article a little bit as a bit of an appetizer or teaser to the book. So we're going to have Brian on again probably in a month or so when the book drops. But for this one, before we start, I just want you to tell us the story of how you split your wife's head open. So this is not clickbait. This is shark bait.
It is, because there was a shark involved. Well, so on our first date, she's from Australia, so I wanted to do something different and something special and something... I wanted her to remember this day regardless of if there was going to be a second date or not.
Yeah, fair enough.
She was going to remember this. So she was from Australia. I figured she...
Where's she from in Australia?
Sydney.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's like when we go somewhere and people ask us, we say we're from LA.
Yeah.
Know? So it's like an hour from Sydney.
Okay,
it's
okay.
Hawkesbury area. So I figured she knew how to surf. Figured she, grew up with kangaroos and wrestled with crocodiles. So I'm like, hey, let's go surfing. And she says, right, O'Brien, I want to go surfing. And just like that, by the way. Yeah.
That deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She has a deep voice.
Righto.
And so anyways, we went to the beach, and I stalked her MySpace page a little bit. When MySpace, I guess, was like the Facebook of back then. And I found out she liked different things. I had a little picnic prepared, and we went surfing after we enjoyed our time on the sand.
Now, did you know how to surf?
I sort of. I mean, I pretended I knew more than I did.
Sure,
but at that time, I was surfing most weekends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you weren't like just totally winging it?
Not totally, but mostly.
Okay.
I'm not going to give myself more credit.
Yeah, fair enough. You probably should, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Thank you. And so we're in the water, waist deep, and just chit-chatting. And I had a 6'3" shortboard that I had, and she had my 9'3" San Miguel board. And
classic.
And this gust of wind comes under my board, my 6'3" board that I had, and it threw it up in the air, and they came down and landed on her head. I felt like it was like in slow motion, like the board was just boom. And I felt bad. And then I felt even worse when I saw this bump started to protrude from her head, and I felt even more badder, whatever is the correct word.
Sure.
Whatever, when she started bleeding.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I always tell people that I started freaking out when there's blood in the ocean, because sharks and blood don't go together. And then when I tell the story in front of large groups of people, I embellish it a little bit, and I say that
she died.
Yeah. Well, no, she had her knife on her, so she didn't die. I said, out of the corner of my eye, there's a shark coming, and she jumped on the shark, and she pulled out her knife and killed the shark and saved my life.
Well, you said that in Australia, everything could kill you there.
Yeah.
What made her decide to stay with you after that?
I knocked the sense out of her.
Okay. Well played. That's not the first time you've ever heard that question, clearly. All right, so clue us into your article here. What's really the big scene behind it, or what's kind of going on with what you've been writing?
Yeah, and really the big idea behind it is really the thrust of the first part of my book is that when you look at the different worlds, the scientific worlds like psychology and sociology, you start seeing God's fingerprint throughout those worlds. And, I know in the past Christianity has been accused of being anti-science, but you really go back in the early days of science, it was the Christians who were the ones spearheading this movement. And
right.
So what this article is just an outpouring of all the research that I've done. And the deeper you go into the different sciences, I talk specifically here about psychology, you see God's fingerprint within this world of psychology. And it's fascinating that God is in this entire process.
So with the idea of, and so you hit on a lot of stuff that people, I would imagine, probably only have a limited, exposure to. There are some more common things in here. The idea of oxytocin, bonding chemicals. These are things that are pretty popular in as far as pop science is concerned. But there are two things that you reference specifically in the article, from hormones being powerful stuff, and then under the subheading of spiritual implications, right? So starting with the idea of hormones here in Genesis 2:24 and 25, can you explain a little bit of the process that you did, that you really connected the concept of oxytocin and the bonding chemical to the concept of one flesh, and kind of flesh that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, about 6 months, 8 months, almost a year ago now, I had lunch with Trimper Longman, who's a scholar of scholars. Pretty much anybody who's taken any Old Testament class has taken his books. This is a guy that scholars would go to for advice, and he's written probably 20 academic books, at least, in 10 or 15 popular level books. And his last popular level book, I don't know if it's last one, but he wrote about 3 years ago. It's called God Loves Sex. And when I saw that title, I said, well, of course I have to read this book. And I read it. It was one.
So you one-upped him and said, everyone loves sex.
Yes, I sure did.
Take that, God.
Not just God, but everyone. And your face, Trimper, just came through. Listen, I love you, man. And so I emailed him. And
he's not listening to him.
No, he is. You guys are worldwide now.
And, yeah.
Well, this will be listened to in Australia, I guarantee
world.
it.
Yeah.
All right. You got family there.
But they're asleep.
Fair enough.
They're asleep there, so I don't know.
Right. And so I went and emailed him, and I said, hey, I'd love to just chat with you about this idea. And this is really where this idea, where I got this concept from. So anyways, in Genesis 2, it talks about that you'll leave your husband and wife, and that they'll become one flesh. The word one flesh is akad basar, or basar akad. Akkad is the Hebrew word for one. It's this idea that it's one, but it's not just like one. It's one in the midst of unity. So, for example, when the Israelites got together, and the Bible says the Israelites cried out all in one voice, it wasn't saying like all the Israelites got together and then they said, okay, on the count of 3, we're all going to yell. The idea was that they were all on the same page. There was a unity within this message that they were proclaiming, whatever it happened to be at the time.
Right. When us as Christians refer to the Trinity, one God revealed in 3 persons, that's the idea of unity within the one. And so what the scholar here, Trimper, is telling me about is that's what akkad is. It's a unity within the one. Then we have this Hebrew word for basar, which is flesh, the physical body, the flesh, the bones. And he said this is the only time in Hebrew scriptures that these words are combined like this. Never again are they combined. And he said that there's significance to that. And as we delve deeper into this, I'm realizing that this one flesh is there's a unity that happens during this one flesh, during sexual intimacy. And what is this unity? It's a physical unity, a spiritual unity, and an emotional unity. So you have the physical, you have the spiritual, and you have the emotional happening all together. And all of this is in the context of this idea of marriage. It's almost as if to say that sex is so powerful that the only force that can contain it is marriage. Sure. And so one flesh then, and if you want to talk about the oxytocin part of it, the science side of things, or yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
I could go on a roll.
Yeah,
I could
talk
for hours on this
good,
stuff. All right. And so the second part is, now here we have the sciences. So you have psychology. Psychology is a scientific study of behavior, mental processes. You learned that psychology 101 100 years ago. And so psychology looks at the brain and how the brain functions, and what chemicals are released during certain acts, what parts of the brain affects how we act and think and things that we do. Is fascinating. The more we learn about psychology, the more we learn about ourselves. But one of the most powerful chemicals that's released during sex is oxytocin. There's a whole bunch of chemicals released, like vasopressin, estrogen, testosterone, a whole bunch of others, and then but oxytocin is the main one that's released, and it's called the love hormone or the cuddle hormone, and it's a chemical that really brings a bond between two partners. And what they've realized is that during sex, this chemical is released in the part of the brain and called the deep limbic system part of the brain, and it creates a bond between the two people. So people say, hey, is casual sex possible? And the answer is, scientifically, psychologically speaking, it's not, because there's a bond that happens during sexual activity, and that part of the brain that this chemical is released is larger in a woman than it is in a man. So lots of times a woman will be more heartbroken than the guy. One of the reasons these scientists suspect that is because there's more of that chemical released, creating a stronger bond with the woman to the man. So as you look at this science side of things, this bond that's being created, but you go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and you see this idea that the Hebrews were talking about from the very beginning of one flesh. So that's why I say, as you look deeper in the scientific worlds, we see God's fingerprint. God calls it a kavod basar, or one flesh. The science calls it oxytocin, but there's a bond, a significant deepness that's going on during sex.
Garrett, you have any thoughts or any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good stuff. Something that I noticed, and I'm kind of curious to get your what's been happening, but whenever I speak about kind of God's plan, I've been in youth ministry for 13 years, to my students and to families and stuff, I get a little bit of pushback.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a little bit of, I mean, this is my perspective, just from a little bit of guilt of just a kind of the natural trend of the hookup and things like that, and from parents' previous experience. And so I almost get this pushback from family. It's like, well, I mean, that's great that God's got that plan for us and even my own students, but that's so unlikely that they're going to be able to stay pure or be with one person. So don't talk about it too much. It's okay that you talk about it once every 2 or 3 years, but you don't need to be. Even my leaders, even some pushback from other adults within the Christian world. So what's some of the feedback that you've gotten, kind of taking a stance a little bit about what God's plan for us is? What's some of the feedback you've gotten from even within the Christian world?
Yeah, well, I've done the same thing. 'Cause I was in youth ministry for 13 years, and I did the True Love Wait series, and I did lots of horrible things during that. Looking back on it, just on a quick side note, one of the illustrations I'd use would be the rose, and I'd always pick on girls for some reason, and for whatever reason, and I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I say, girls, every time you hook up with a guy or kiss a guy or go further with a guy or do this with a guy, it's you lose part of yourself. And every time I did that, I'd take off a rose petal, and then I said, what do you have left to give to that guy at the altar? People would cry, and I'm thinking,
nailed it.
Man, I got it, man. The best youth pastor in the world, and then I realized, who wants that rose? God wants that rose, because God could redeem that rose. So the pushback that I've received over the years with this is, it's archaic, it's not realistic, I've messed up, so what's going on? And that was really part of the thrust that got me to write this book is are we going to keep saying this message and bringing this message the same way we always have been? Or is there a new way to reframe it? And that's what this book is all about, because I've done everything how we used to do it, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work, and working with college students now for 6 years directly, I've had a lot of feedback on kind of what's a better way to approach it, because most students have hooked up at one level or another, whether it's full-on sexual intercourse or whether it's anything in between, and what is not effective is saying, listen, just don't do any of that because the Bible says. I believe that, but we got to be able to engage in a conversation and dialogue, because chances are if they're hooking up with somebody, there's a underlying surface, something missing underneath the surface that's going on, and that's what we got to hit. Instead of hitting them over the head with the Bible saying you're sinners, you're evil, you're bad, you're rotten, we got to say, why? What's going on? How can I come along and support you? We're not saying what they're doing is okay, but we're trying to get down to the root, because I think all this other talk has all been surface stuff. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. But until you get underneath the surface, you're not going to be very effective. And then the other message of just don't do it, just don't do it, just don't do it. It's bad, 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 wrong, wrong, wrong. Then you get married, all of a sudden, it's good, it's beautiful. That causes a lot of harm as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so I like this. We'll close with this idea. So the spiritual implications here, the story of Adam and Eve is our story. Their union, their eventual fall, it is the story of our desires, our choices, and the brokenness we all feel. See Romans 5. It's a story that we all yearn for, a deep, intimate, meaningful, trusting relationship with a partner, which you then put in the caveat as oneness. And so you make the assertion that this is how God has created us. So this seems to be pretty antithetical to the idea of where, not only where we're at, but where we're going to continue to head, right? This seems like the current trajectory. So insofar as your experience and your understanding of this now, for people who are in ministry or people who are curious or having kids or raising kids in this atmosphere, what is just the best advice you can give to maybe like parents or people who are getting ready to have these conversations with their kids just about sexual faithfulness and this kind of idea for people who are listening?
The best of advice I could have, well, for the parents would be this, was talk to your kids about sex. It's not a one-time conversation. I really think I'm going to write a follow-up book to this, a book on how parents can talk to their...
I never got the sex talk from my parents.
You know what?
Ever.
Yeah.
Mine was just use protection.
Yeah.
That was it. Don't get one pregnant. Oh, thanks for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's got to be a.
So my teacher said. So
yeah,
thanks, Dad.
yeah. There you go. It's got to be a continual conversation,
Yeah.
and we gotta kind of take away that awkwardness of having that sex talk and just make it natural.
Right.
You go in the Jewish culture, it was celebrated.
Right.
It was celebrated, and so for the parents. Understand that sex should not be taboo. Sex should be celebrated, and our kids should understand that sex is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a gift from God. So why are we making it so awkward? And then for students, understanding that it is easy to hook up. It is easy to get our physical needs met, but surround yourself with godly people because there are so many implications, so much baggage that will bring in the long run. And if students could see the long run and take their eyes off of this short-term goal here and focus on what is to come, they will find freedom in that, and they will find fulfillment, and they will find a sense of pride because they're able to look at the long term and say, you know what? I want to do what's right. And in that, there's freedom. When we live how we're designed to live, there's freedom and there's joy in that like none other.
Yeah, so what I really like when you're talking about the idea of marriage being the correct context and the correct arena for that. So really get rid of the taboo that sex is anything but spectacular, which is super rad. Right, so making sure that that's known, celebrated, but also communicating the idea that, hey, maybe there's a best context, right? Maybe there are good contexts. If you have sex with somebody you're committed to, that's not, there could be worse than just a random binge of hookups or whatever there, but it's not a matter of good or bad. It's more of a conversation of better and best.
I like that.
Would be something you'd say.
Yeah.
So you heard it here, maybe not first, but probably first. We are going to have Brian on again in the coming weeks. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can find me. I'm at Josh_Carmen. Brian is at Brian A. Sands. Garrett is at T Student Life. Jamothy, who's off camera over here, is at James YUILE. And Chris doesn't want you to contact him. So thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll talk with you soon.
See ya.